attempting to replicate dangerous social media challenges using an automobile, we've approved charges. Social media challenges are trends where users create and share videos of themselves and others performing a specific action designed to both entertain and encourage others to attempt their own challenges. It's a form of audience engagement because generally these challenges with regard to their success are measured by how many new participants view the original challenge and then create their own version of the challenge. And they post those versions online at various websites, including TikTok and Instagram. Now, many of these challenges are benign in nature, such as dance, lip sync, or athletic challenges. However, recently, we have had 2 criminal investigations involving the dangerous and reckless use of an automobile to create what are known as stunt challenges. So it's important for the public to understand that these challenges can have severe real-world consequences, creating significant risk to participants and sometimes to bystanders as well. With regard to the 2 cases, in one case, involuntary manslaughter charges were brought against a male juvenile driver regarding a challenge held during the early morning hours on June 1st, 2025 at the Freedom High School parking lot. On that date, the juvenile driver, who was aged 17 years, used a rope to tie an upside-down folding table to the back of his automobile and then pulled that table through the parking lot while a juvenile male friend, also age 17, rode sitting on top of the table. Unfortunately, the juvenile driver recklessly operated his vehicle at a significant speed, such that it whipped the rider sitting on the table into another parked vehicle, resulting in the death of the 17-year-old. The other incident occurred in March of 2025 and involved a 19-year-old female driver. She operated her vehicle while her female friend, age 20, stood on the trunk. This challenge involved a friend surfing on the back of a moving vehicle as it drove through the park and ride parking lot on William Penn Highway, also in Bethlehem Township. Unfortunately, the friend was thrown from the moving vehicle and received catastrophic head injuries that will be permanent in nature. Now, with regard to these 2 cases, the charges are still open, but I need to note that in every criminal case, the fact that an arrest has occurred or that the complaint has been charged with a crime, that the complaint has been filed and the defendant charged with the crime is merely an accusation. All defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty. However, what I can say about our investigation is that neither of these young drivers were involved in criminogenic thinking. In other words, they were not planning to injure their victims. However, in both incidents, the action of these drivers were so grossly negligent and reckless that it constituted criminal culpable state of mind. Now, our release with regard to these charges were not designed to stigmatize either the victims or the families, and there's nothing to celebrate about this. The incidents were horrific with regard to the outcome. Further, with regard to these families, the parents in particular, I need to note that the families were realistic and acknowledged that all participants in these TikTok challenges were attracted by the risk of danger. In other words, they're not claiming that their children who were tragically injured were forced to participate. They agreed to participate. I also feel comfortable in stating that the parents of these victims expressed disappointment, both in their own children for participating in these stunt challenges, and with regard to the close friends of their children who agreed to place their children in risk of death. There's no getting around the fact that the drivers of these automobiles were a direct cause of these injuries. So the parents of these victims struggle with the fact that the drivers themselves were not exposed to any risk as they operated their vehicle around these parking lots because only their children were in risk of danger. The parents were also concerned that if no charges are brought, only the victims will pay the ultimate price for their injuries and not the drivers who actually caused the injuries. So, in fairness to the parents, they struggled because they understood that these events did not involve criminogenic thinking. The people who were most culpable for the injuries were close friends of their children who they liked and trusted. So they struggled a lot with this. I also feel comfortable characterizing this struggle as a sense of outrage with the tragic outcome. They were angry about what happened. They were angry about their loss. And they were frustrated with the fact that the people who drove the cars that caused injuries to their children were well known to their children and their close friends. So neither set of parents is out to seek revenge or even punishment for the drivers. But they also knew that if nothing is done, there will be other young victims as these TikTok challenges seem to increase in attraction, and it's just a matter of time till other youth are similarly injured. These parents do not want other families to go through the same horror and pain that they've had to endure. Ultimately, there needed to be accountability for the death and the permanent brain injury to these two victims. Our office, meaning myself, made the ultimate charging decision. The ultimate charging decision was not made by the parents. However, before the charges were filed, both the Bethlehem Township Police Department and myself met with the parents on multiple occasions to keep them apprised of the investigation and the ultimate charging decision. In doing so, I assured both families that should these defendants acknowledge their involvement in this matter and acknowledge that their involvement constituted criminally reckless behavior, that as best we can allow, the resolution of these charges will not be a permanent stain on the future of these defendants. To be more specific, I promise these families that in return for the admission by these drivers that they engage in this criminally reckless behavior, there will be public accountability, and that after a successful completion of a period of supervision, these defendants will have the opportunity to ask that their criminal charges be expunged. So again, while this resolution is nothing to celebrate, it's important that we make this announcement because ultimately it becomes a serious issue of public safety when children engage in these dangerous stunts. That's the end of my statement. If there are any questions.
Did both defendants admit that they were guilty?
Well, we don't get to speak to the defendants at this point. They're charged. They're open charges. Both are represented by counsel. And at this point, I do not anticipate that there will be a trial, but ultimately that'll be a decision between defense counsel and the defendants.
And they were both charged with involuntary manslaughter?
Well, the young lady that had permanent brain damage is still alive. The most serious charge in that is a felony charge, aggravated assault and aggravated assault by vehicle.
And
So they're...
Do you know all the charges for both?
Well, involuntary manslaughter is a charge for the death of the juvenile.
Involuntary?
Involuntary. With regard to the 19-year-old driver, where the young lady fell off the car and hit her head in the pavement, those charges are aggravated assault by vehicle, careless driving, and persons hanging on a vehicle. That's an actual vehicle code charge. The last two are vehicle code charges.
So this would be probation?
Well, it's not resolved yet.
I mean,
What do you
what-
what are you seeking?
This is what I believe the parents are hoping for, that the drivers acknowledge that their behavior is criminally reckless and they're responsible for the injuries. As a result, they're both first-time offenders. They both, one in juvenile court and the other in adult court, can have the opportunity, with the parents' with the parents of the victim's blessing, to participate in programs that allow supervision, and if the supervision is successfully completed, the charges can be expunged.
What types of supervision? What is that? Can you give more detail of what that looks like?
Well, in juvenile court, the supervision is designed by the judge in juvenile court and the juvenile probation department, as well as the lawyers involved in the case. And generally, it may involve things such as counseling, other programs that are considered to be restorative in nature, and it may also be the defendant may be asked to reach out to the families themselves, because the families did have a closeness and a trust with these close friends. I mean, they knew them very well. That's what's so heartbreaking about what happened in this case.
When was that 17-year-old charged with the?
That's a juvenile court matter. It's sort of confidential, but it's still open. It's not public record. But I can announce the charges, but I can't announce identifying information with regard to the child itself.
The 19-year-old was charged in May. Why
Right.
is now the time to come out and talk about this and not back in May?
Well, because in the interim, we've had the second issue, and we recently filed the charges in the second case, and I did not want to make an announcement until I felt comfortable that I had both sets of parents understanding what the possible outcomes were, and also I reviewed with the parents the fact that this would be released.
So just to be clear, you're not seeking prison time?
No, at this point, no, because I anticipate that it likely will be resolved without a trial. If there is a trial, then ultimately punishment is out of my hands, and the judge, even in either in juvenile court or in criminal court, will make a decision as to the punishment with regard to the sentencing guidelines and the general expectations.
Do you believe social media platforms hold any liability in cases like this where they're allowing these type of challenges to propagate?
They don't expose themselves to criminal liability, obviously, but there's a moral obligation. And the idea that they glorify these dangerous stunts, and if you go online and put in car surfing, or I know in New York City they surf on top of subway cars and circulate those videos all over. And this table surfing is also all over in social media. When you watch that as an adult, you know that it's horribly dangerous, and there's no way you would want your child to engage in that type of activity, whether you're the person to ride on the table or the person who's going to drag along a friend behind the car. It's ridiculous. And they glorify, those social media accounts glorify this type of behavior.
Have the victim's parents indicated they might go after them civilly?
That's not our call. We have a victims advocate unit that's in touch with the family and provides them with the best support we can, including the opportunity to obtain counseling. And
I mean, go after the social media companies.
well, the social media companies is a different issue too, but obviously vehicles were involved, and both sets of parents are aware that there may be claims that may be brought civilly, but we don't participate in that, and we don't give advice as to that.
The other kids that were there the night of the Freedom High School incident, are you looking at charging them with anything?
We looked at everyone, yes. The other persons who were there were not engaged in driving and actively involved in riding at that time. They were just there as an audience, so no charges were brought against those juveniles.
Would you consider this to be an unusual avenue to take in terms of charging someone with involuntary manslaughter and not seeking any prison time or incarceration or?
Well, no, giving the defendant and what happened, these people involved in this weren't planning on injuring anybody. So they weren't thinking like criminals. When I said criminogenic thinking, I mean people who think like criminals because they intentionally want to injure somebody or take someone's property. They thought it was going to be a good time to risk death or serious dangerous injury, and it constituted criminally culpable behavior, especially when you use a vehicle to do that. So I think young people, first offenders who engage in this type of behavior, the first response from law enforcement is not, these are community safety issues and that we need to lock these people up because they think like criminals.
So are you trying to use these charges as an example for other kids? To
Well,
not do this?
we announce these charges, yes, to deliver a message to everyone that when you engage in such reckless behavior that places someone in danger of serious injury or death, you can be held criminally culpable for your behavior. Yes.
How much did the parents, communication with the parents weigh in on your decision? And would you say?
A lot,
unusual?
a lot. And my heart goes out for both sets of parents because they struggled because they knew these drivers. They were close friends of the children. They trusted them and thought of them as, good people, and they were not concerned that their children were hanging out with them as friends. But they had no idea, neither parent had any idea that this type of behavior was contemplated by either their children or their children's friends.
But you wouldn't need their permission to pursue criminal charges?
I did not need their permission, but I spoke with both families and told them that I did not want to victimize them. And there was some concern about this, and not that there was a lot of debate. I mean, the parents weren't pushed, but I spoke about the importance about this. I spoke about the issue of accountability and public safety and deterring other people, and they were on board with all those. They did have, I would say, affection for the defendants, both sets of parents, because they were those kids were in their house and participated as part of their family. So they were torn about this, but ultimately they have to deal with this loss and what it means. And they didn't want this loss to be for naught. I think they understood that by pursuing charges and pursuing accountability, at least these injuries might have some possible good impact on the community because it may deter others.
What are you recommending parents do to make sure something like this doesn't happen to their children?
Well, I don't know. As a father of 3 children, I don't know that you can give them advice to prevent that, other than you need to be open with your children and have open lines of communication. Make sure you understand who their friends are, and make sure they understand boundaries with regard to what's appropriate behavior and not appropriate behavior. And there's nothing about these parents at all that caused me to believe they weren't anything other than appropriate, committed, good parents. And they're just shocked and hurt by everyone involved, including their children who made bad choices as well. I think they're very realistic about what happened, and my heart goes out to them.
You mentioned social media challenges. Was this specifically TikTok, or was it just in general?
I believe this is a TikTok challenge specifically with the folding table case. The car surfing you can find on various media sites, including TikTok.
I assumed that you were able, that investigators were able to collect video evidence of both these cases. Were witnesses filming themselves, or was it just, I assume that both the locations have video camera, like surveillance cameras set up?
All of the video that could be recovered were recovered. We had search warrants out, we collected video from parking lots and things of that nature, yes.
Does that include personal devices of those accidents?
We did issue search warrants to access cell phones, yes, of juveniles who are at the scene, yes.
Is that for both cases or just the high school case?
Well, the high school case was where most video was captured, yes, yes.
Are you identifying the 19-year-old girl who was involved in the March case?
Well, they're adult charges, so they're public record. But I purposely did not identify that defendant in the press release because I explained to the families that I did not want to traffic on the identity of the people involved in this. I wanted to make the announcement about how dangerous this kind of behavior was, and the fact that criminal charges were filed so that we deliver an appropriate message to other youth who might consider these challenges. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And by the way, I wasn't expecting to have this today. I just wanted to release it and that be it, but there was an awful lot of questions, so I thought it was appropriate that I answer any you might have. Thank you.
Thanks.
One more question, off camera.
Sure.
Just what exactly are you looking forward to, or hoping to have in terms of a